أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وبارك وسلم. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all once again to another session of our online video lecture series. In today's lecture, we'll have discussion on financial instruments. Last time we had discussion on financial market or stock market, and before that we had discussion on the financial market in general. So today we're going to be having discussion on financial instruments. Regarding the definition and the comprehension of the financial instrument or financial security, we had discussion in our first lecture of this chapter number 4. Today we will not have more discussion on what financial instrument is, because we have already discussed. We will try to spend more time on discussing different types of financial instruments. So let's have a recap of what has been discussed about the financial instrument or financial security. Financial instrument or financial security is a document that is issued by an organization, and that organization can be a public organization or a private organization. Okay? Organization can be a corporation, or it can be a government-owned organization. This document represents a legal agreement between two or more individuals. These individuals can be legal entities or natural entities. Legal person or natural person, involving some sort of monetary value and tradable on financial market. So basically there are 5 characteristics of a financial instrument or financial security. Financial security, okay, or financial instrument. So the first characteristic is that it's issued by an organization, and that organization is listed on the Securities and Exchange Commission, or if not listed, that organization is credible, well known on that specific market where these instruments are issued. Number 2 is that this document represents a legal agreement between 2 or more parties. Legal agreement between 2 or more parties. And number 4 is it has a monetary value. Monetary value, the value of that could be written on the face of it, right? Face of it, right? On the face of the document, the value of the monetary value is specified. So a document which contains, number 1, these characteristics, that it's issued by an organization. Number 2, it represents legal agreement between 2 or more individuals. Number 3, it has a monetary value. Number 4, and this is number 2. Number 4, it's tradable on financial market, and as a number 5, we can say it has a maturity period. Maturity. So maturity is basically the period after which the security is going to be purchased back by the issuing organization, right? Expiration date, we can say. So these 5 characteristics are the characteristics of the financial security or financial instrument. So based on the maturity, we can divide the financial instruments into short term and long term, and based on the purpose or you can say financing, we divide them into debt financing securities and equity financing securities that we will discuss later on. So in today's financial marketplace, financial instruments can be classified generally into equity based and debt based. Equity based basically represent ownership of the assets in the issuing organization, and debt based financial security represents a loan made by an investor to the owner of the assets. So debt based security basically they represent that you have given a loan, and equity based financial instrument represent that you have invested and you are the owner of the assets with respect to the percentage of investment through the financial securities that you have made in that organization. Corporations issue such instruments in order to collect funds they need, which is called financing. So the question is, why financial securities are issued? The answer is in order to do financing, or when organizations are in need of long-term and short-term money or funds, they usually issue financial securities of debt-based or equity-based. When they issue debt-based financial securities, they are basically doing debt financing. When they issue equity-based financial securities, the organizations are basically doing equity financing. So debt financing is issuance of debt-based financial securities by the organization in order to collect funds, and equity financing is the issuance of equity-based financial securities or instruments by the organization in order to collect funds to fulfill their shortcomings or deficits. Okay, so that's about the financial instrument. Now, these financial instruments are divided into two categories. Based on the market, we have money market instruments or financial securities, and capital market instruments or securities. Based on the time period, we can divide them into short-term financial instruments and long-term financial instruments. Based on the base, or we can say purpose, you can divide them into debt-based and equity-based. Based from organizations' financing perspective, we can divide them into debt financing and equity financing. So basically, these are different names given from different perspectives to the same thing, which is financial security that we have been discussing. Hope it's clear. So first, we are going to talk about the money market instruments, which are short-term financial instruments. Then we will have discussion on the capital market instruments, which are long-term financial instruments. Money market also has debt-based equities and debt-based financial instruments and equity-based financial instruments. Similarly, capital market also has debt-based financial instruments and equity-based financial instruments. Right? The difference between money market and capital market instrument is that these instruments are for short term and these instruments are for long term, and both have the same purpose from organization perspective, which is financing, and both can be debt financing and equity financing, right? Both can be debt financing and equity financing, and both are issued by the organizations to do debt financing and equity financing, right? So this is the common thing. But the difference between money market instrument and capital market instrument is instruments being short term and long term. Hope it's clear to you. Okay, so these are money market instruments by name. T-bills, we can call them treasury bills, commercial paper, repurchase agreements, certificates of deposit, bankers' acceptance. These are basically 5 commonly used or widely used money market instruments. All of them are short term, starting from 1 day, 24 hours, or overnight till less than 1 year period. Each financial security is used for a specific purpose, in the business. And out of these 5, some are equity based and some are debt based. Some are issued in order to do equity financing and some are issued in order to do debt financing by the organizations. Similarly, we have capital market instruments. Capital market instruments, there are 5, these 5 commonly or widely or mainly used financial instruments. They are issued by the organizations in order to do long-term financing, right? Long-term equity financing or long-term debt financing. Out of these 5, some of them are debt based and some of them are equity based. We'll be discussing them one by one, and we'll see that which one is equity and which one is debt. Okay, so here number 1 is treasury notes, treasury bonds, commercial bonds or corporate bonds, and then we have common stock and preferred stock. Okay, so let's go ahead. Money market instruments. They are all those financial instruments which have a maturity period of 1 or less than 1 year. Short-term investment vehicles they are also called short-term investment vehicles. They are also called short-term investment vehicles. Short-term investment vehicles, right? They are also called short-term investment vehicles. They are traded in the money market, which represents financial market for short term. Money market is the financial market. Is the financial market for what? For short term, which means up to 1 year of maturity, marketable financial assets. The other name for financial instruments is marketable financial assets, right? It's the same name, we can use interchangeably. The risk as well as the return on investment of the short-term financial vehicles or investment vehicles is usually lower than for other type of investments. The main short-term investment vehicles are the one that we discussed previously. So we have discussed previously as well that money market instruments are short-term. Since they are short-term, their risk is low and as well as their return is low, because in finance we have a rule which says low risk, low return, minimum risk, minimum return, maximum risk, maximum return. So there is a time value of money risk factor involved as well. That's why, since they are short term, the risk of losing money is less. That's why return on them is also very less. If you look at them, on one side they are investment vehicles, but on the other side they are financing vehicles as well. From the organization who are issuing these instruments, it's financing. From the perspective of the buyer or purchaser or of these instruments, it's basically the investment, because when they purchase these, they are basically investing because they are requiring return, and the organizations who are willing to issue these instruments, they are also willing to pay an amount, and that amount is basically cost of capital for them. It's cost for them, right? So that's about the money market instrument. Now let's go ahead and further have discussion on them one by one. Okay. Let's talk about the treasury bills. Treasury bills, basically they are issued by the central bank of the country on behalf of the government, right? They are zero coupon and bear no interest. It means that they are issued on discount and repurchased or redeemed on face value or par value. Purchased, repurchase or redeem has the same meaning. Discount means that if the face value or par value of the T-bill is $10, the bank will issue it and charged the investors $8 per T-bill. Upon the maturity, they'll be purchased back by the central bank by $10. For example, if a T-bill is issued by the Central Bank of Afghanistan and its value is 10 Afghani, right, 10 Afghani, the face value is 10 Afghani, but bank issues it at 8 Afghani, right, 8 Afghani, and the maturity is 1 year. So it means that central bank or the Afghanistan bank, if today they are issuing the 10 Afghani T-bill note at 8 Afghani, after 1 year they will repurchase it at 10 Afghani. So if a person buys, suppose if a person buys say 1,000 T-bills, 1,000 T-bills, someone purchased 1,000 T-bills, and remember that there is no risk of losing money which is invested in T-bills. That's why T-bills give you very less return as well, because it's risk-free investment. So if someone purchases 1,000 T-bills and after 1 year he earns 2 Afghani on each T-bill, so what will be the return for him after 1 year? The return will be 2,000, right? 2,000 Afghani return. For example, 1,000 T-bills multiplied by 8, that becomes 8,000. If today I invest 8,000 in the central bank, after 1 year I'll be given 2,000 Afghani profit, and the 1,000 T-bills that I have purchased today, I'll be paid by the central bank 10,000 for those T-bills that I have invested in, right? Okay, they are issued to meet short-term deficits faced by the government and generate revenue. Sometimes government or facing short-term deficits means that in upcoming month they are in short of money to pay for their salaries of for example medical staff, so they issue T-bills and they collect money from people, and after 1 year they will repurchase T-bills and the money will be paid back to the people who have invested in. So in short run they have fulfilled their need and they have collected money from people in order to pay medical staff their salary. They can be of 1 month, 3 months, 6 months and 52 weeks, which is less than a year. They can be traded on the secondary money market. Means if I cannot wait for 1 year, I can sell it on the market, which is called money market, onto someone else who is willing to invest and who is willing to wait for 1 year. For example, I bought 1,000 units of treasury bills, each one cost 8 Afghani, and I invested 8,000 Afghani. If I wait for 1 year, I'll receive 10,000 Afghani, which means that I am earning 2,000 Afghani. But after 6 months, I need the money. So I'm in need of money. So how can I get that money? I have T-bills but no money. I can sell those T-bills onto someone else who is willing to purchase. For example, I have waited for 6 months. So in 6 months, I should earn 1,000, and the remaining 1,000 will be left to the one who will wait for the other 6 months. or maybe less than I'm willing to sell them on less revenue. For example, for 6 months I have waited. By default, I should receive $1,000 of return, but I say if someone pays me 500 return or 800, I'm okay with that. I'm willing to sell. Suppose Mahmoud wants to purchase it, so I tell him that I have 100,000 units of T-bills, which costs me 8,000 Afghani, and the return is 2,000. I have waited for 6 months, which means that I should be earning 1,000, but instead of 1,000, I'm okay with 800. Please pay me 800 extra, which becomes 8,800, and you wait for 6 months further, and you will receive 10,000, which means you will receive 1,200 of return for waiting further 6 months. Maybe he agrees with that, and I sell them and I cash my money, right? So each security, the terms, the discussion that we had on treasury bills, on trading and reselling, this applies to all the securities that we'll be discussing further. So I'm mentioning it here right now, so there is no waste of time when we discuss each security. Okay. All right. Now let's go ahead and study the next one. This is basically the specimen of the T-bill. It's the government of Jamaica. Its face value is 5 million. So if someone buys it, he is required to pay 5 million. And here, if you remember, it's written markup $91,000, which means that today you will pay 91,000 less than 5 million, and you will wait, for example, for basically 6 months. You can see there is issuing date and due date. So 2001, 27th of February 2001 it's issued, and it will get mature on 28th of August 2001. So it's for 6 months. So in 6 months, if you invest 5 million, you will earn $91,000. So what will happen on the day of February 27th? Government of Jamaica, while selling it, so anyone who is interested in investing money, he'll pay 91,000 less than this face value, and after 1 year he'll be paid 5 million. So sorry, 6 months. So in 6 months he earns 91,000 on the investment of $4,009,000. Okay, that's the specimen of the basically the treasury bill. Now we have commercial paper. Commercial paper is basically it's a promissory note. It's used by the traders, the businessmen. They issue these to one another in order to be able to purchase to have a credit purchase of anything they are in need of. The global money market commercial paper is an unsecured promissory note with a fixed maturity of 1 to 27 days, not more than 6 months. So you have to remember that commercial paper, number one, it's unsecured promissory note, which means that there is more risk, there is no guarantee, it's not backed by any security. Number two, it has a fixed maturity period which starts from 1 to 270 days. It cannot be more than 9 months, right? They're issued by highly large, strong and well-reputed companies and financial institutions. Highly large, strong and well-reputed companies and financial institutions. Why they are issued? They are issued to fill the gap between receipts and payments of the company. For example, their receipts are less than their payments, so they do not make payment. Instead of paying cash, they issue commercial paper. For example, if they purchase something, they issue commercial paper instead of paying them cash money. So the person issuing commercial paper, the entity or organization issuing the commercial paper should be highly strong, well reputed, large, because it's unsecured. So the only security the purchaser of commercial paper can have is the assurity that the organization to whom he is getting this commercial paper is strong enough, is well reputed, and not going to collapse in upcoming 1 to 270 days. Okay, commercial paper is usually sold at discount or face value and carries higher interest repayment rates than bonds. So it has a face value, sold on discount. For example, if face value is $10,000, it will be sold on, suppose, $9,800. There is $200 discounts on the face value, and besides that it has an interest rate, which means that after the maturity period, the holder of the commercial paper not only receive $200 face value as a discount, but also he will receive interest equaling to the rate mentioned on that. For example, if it has a 10% interest, so 10% multiplied by the investment amount, that will be the return as an interest after the maturity. The amount of fund borrowed and the date of maturity is mentioned on the paper. How much fund is borrowed by the issuing organization and when this security will mature or become due is also mentioned on the face of commercial paper. So how many things we have mentioned here? Number one, commercial paper is unsecured promissory note. It has a fixed maturity of 1 to 270 days, which is less than 9 months. Number two, they are issued by highly large, strong and well reputed companies. Why they are issued? They issue it in order to fill the gap between the receipts and payments, and the commercial paper are issued on discount from the face value, and they have interest rate as well. So anyone investing in commercial paper will receive two types of return. Number one, discount from the face value. Number two, interest rates. And on the face of the commercial paper, how much money was borrowed by the issuing organization, that is also mentioned, and also the rate of maturity is mentioned, right? Okay, let's see what is the next. Certificates of deposit. Remember, commercial paper does not have a specific specimen. It can be any format. It could be a printed paper, or it could be a simple paper, or it depends upon the issuing company. But the most important part is that we mention here, that should be written on the face of that document. Certificate of deposit. As from the name you can see, it's certificate of deposit. It means that there is someone who is depositing a specific amount of money somewhere, and that depositor issues a certificate showing that this person has a deposit with them, right? So that is the meaning that we get from the name of the security, certificate of deposit. So let's talk about it. It's a financial product commonly offered to customers by the commercial paper. So you can see that specifically, you can see that certificates of deposit, they are basically issued by the commercial banks. To whom? To their customers. It's a financial product. It's the evidence of deposit made by a person who is the customer in a bank, which is commercial bank, specifying the amount that he is going to deposit. They are similar to saving accounts. They are money in the bank basically. Certificate of deposit, they are the evidence of money in the bank. The period of deposit and interest rate specified. They are traded in the secondary money market. They are also called negotiable CODs. it is intended that CODs will be held until maturity, at which the money may be withdrawn together with the accrued interest. Okay, so basically certificates of deposit, they are issued by the commercial banks to their customers. If their customers are willing to deposit a certain amount of money for a certain period of time. So what happens is that, for example, Ahmad wants to deposit for example $1 million in Afghanistan International Bank. So against that, Afghanistan International Bank will issue certificate of deposit. This certificate of deposit will bear the amount of money which is deposited by Ahmad. The maturity period means for how long this money will be held in the bank, the interest rate, right? So these three things will be mentioned. So at the end of maturity, Ahmad will receive his $1 million along with the interest amount. For example, if the amount is 10%, so 10% of 1 million becomes $10,000. So he will receive 10,000 extra at the end of maturity. Now, why banks issue certificates of deposit? Number one, to give the surety that their money is safe in the bank. Number two, to fulfill their financial deficits if they have any. Number three, to give an opportunity of investment to their customers to earn more money, and if to put the money which are in the shelves of their customers, to put that money into circulation. Okay, so for example, if Ahmad needs his money back before the maturity, what can he do? He can basically sell this certificate of deposit to someone else who is willing to buy and who is willing to wait for remaining maturity, so that the profit that was to be received after the maturity, that could be basically divided into the new buyer and between the original buyer. For example, Ahmad was to receive 10,000 as an return, as an interest. If he has waited for 2 months and there are 2 months remaining for the maturity of certificate of deposit, so he can, for example, receive 4,000 or 5,000, and the remaining 5,000 profit or benefit will be left to, for example, Mahmoud, who will buy the certificate and wait for 2 months further. Okay. Next we have, this is the specimen of certificate of deposit. Everything is mentioned here. You can see that 27 million USD. The interest rate is specified as well. The time is specified as well, and the issuer and the depositor signature, everything is mentioned on that. Okay. All right. Next we have repurchase agreement. From the name, repurchase agreement. So it's an agreement to repurchase something. For example, now I am selling it, but I am agreeing to repurchase it from you after a certain period of time. So that becomes a repurchase agreement. A repurchase agreement, also called a repo. It's the sale of security together with an agreement to resell, for the seller to buy back the security at a later date. For example, I have a financial security. For example, let's suppose I have a commercial paper. I want to sell it, but together of selling this commercial paper, I am giving a promise to repurchase it. This becomes a repurchase agreement. So this financial security has a sales price and a repurchase price. So basically, repurchase price is higher than the sale price, and the difference between the sale price and repurchase price is basically the profit of investing in the repurchase agreement. All the terms and conditions, rate of interest, everything is mentioned. Basically, it's a means of financing. It can be overnight repo or term repo. Overnight means for one night, and term means more than one. So that is basically a repurchase agreement, right? Repurchase agreement can be for any asset, for any valuable asset that has a monetary value, and for that we can issue repurchase agreement. So it's basically an agreement between two parties to sell something and then repurchase. Sell price, repurchase prices are mentioned. Sell price is less, repurchase price is higher. The difference is the profit. And besides, there is an interest rate mentioned as well. So wherever there is interest involved, that becomes debt-based financial security, or that is a means of debt financing. For example, repurchase agreement was debt financing, debt security. Similarly, certificate of deposit is a debt security. Commercial paper is a debt security because they have an interest rate. While treasury bill is not non-debt, it's an equity-based financial security. Now let's talk about the banker's acceptance. So you can see banker's acceptance from the name, banker's acceptance. It's basically something between the bankers, between the two banks. There is something accepted by two banks. So it means that one is the bank of buyer and the second is the bank of seller. So buyer and seller are two other parties. Between these buyer and seller, who could be companies as well, banks are involved, two different banks, one bank in one country, other bank in other country. And on behalf of these two people who are doing business, for example, say exporter and importer, on behalf of these exporter and importer, basically bankers deal in between. They come as a middleman and they give assurance to their customers. For example, the exporter's bank give assurance to the exporter that he will be paid, and importer's bank give assurance to make payment on behalf of importer. So there is an agreement between these two banks that's called banker's acceptance, which is accepted by both the exporter and the importer. It's basically a document which shows a promised future payment accepted and guaranteed by a bank and drawn on a deposit at the bank, or a letter of credit or bill of exchange. This banker's acceptance can be a letter of credit, it can be bill of exchange. These are two types of negotiable instruments. Or time draft, drawn on the accepted and accepted by a bank. It is accepting bank's obligation to pay the holders of the draft at maturity. The banker's acceptance specifies the amount of money, the date, the person to which the payment is due. The holder of the draft can sell, exchange it for cash at a discount to a buyer who is willing to wait until the maturity date for the funds in the deposit. It's usually used in export and imports of goods by the businessman. The bank becomes the connector between the exporter and importer. Okay, so in order to summarize it, it's a financial security. So those 5 characteristics are there. For example, monetary value, time period, parties, maturity. These things are common in all the financial instruments. The difference is that it's used by importers or by exporters. It's used by the businessman at the time of export and import. This document is basically issued by a bank, and that bank issuing this document becomes the connector between the importer and exporter. You know that exporter is in one country, importer is in another country, and they do not know each other, and they cannot trust one another. But exporter has a bank account, importer has a bank account. Their banks can be trusted. So banks comes into the operation on behalf of these businessmen, and one bank issue a letter on the other bank, right, and other bank accepts that, and the bank issuing it and the bank accepting it, they both have a commission which they charge from their respective account holders or customers, right. So for example, I want to import, for example, some goods who costs me $10,000. So before transferring this $10,000, I contact my bank to issue a banker's acceptance on the bank of the exporter, who is in, for example, India. So on my behalf, my bank issues a note or a bill or letter of credit or draft, whatever you call it, informs the exporter's bank, and exporter banks accept that. So what happens that the exporter's bank informs the exporter to release the goods, and the time period is, for example, could be the number of days after which the goods will be received by me in Afghanistan. So when the goods are received, I inform my bank to release the funds, and my bank release the funds to the exporter's bank, and exporter banks then pay the fund to the exporter, right. But exporter will not release the goods until and unless he receives the banker's acceptance. So when he receives the banker's acceptance, the surety from the bank that his money is saved, he releases the goods. For example, if this takes 1 month and before 1 month he is in need of money, he can sell this banker's acceptance onto someone else, and he can cash his money before waiting for my funds to hit his accounts to carry on his business. So that is how this is done on the market. So this is basically the process of banker's acceptance. There is importer and there is exporter. Importer is in America, and there is a bank. An exporter is, for example, in Japan, and he has his own bank. So basically, importer gives purchase order to exporter. That is number one. Number two step is that importer orders his bank to issue a letter of credit to exporter's bank. So he receives the order and then application for letter of credit. Then the importer's bank issue a letter of credit to exporter's bank, who is in Japan. When he receives this, the bank in Japan gives a notification to exporter, right? Then the exporter issues shipment, right? And also provides shipment document to the bank. When he receives that, Japanese bank inform American bank and accept the time draft. So that is how this takes place. When the goods are received by the importer, the payment is made by this bank, and when payment is received by this, he informs the exporter. So this is how the life cycle of a typical banker's acceptance is, in how it is used, in how it from what steps it passes through. Okay. Now we have capital market instruments. There are also financial instruments. They are for long term. They can be equity based and debt based. Their maturity periods for more than 1 year. It's a source of long term investment, and on the other hand, they are the source of long term financing. And there are 5 common that we discussed before. So let's go and discuss them one by one. Number 1 is treasury note. Treasury bill, they are short term, but treasury notes are long term. They are issued by the government usually the central bank. They could be 1 year to 10 years. So they could be for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. They have interest payments, and the payment is made every 6 months until maturity. They are issued by the central banks. They are issued on discount and repurchased and redeemed on face value, just like the treasury bills. They are issued to meet long-term deficits by the government. For example, government is starting a long-term project, but they are in need of money. Instead of getting a loan from World Bank or IMF, they see it better to collect money from within the country, from the investors, by issuing treasury notes. They can be traded in the secondary market just like the treasury bills. There is secondary capital market. They can be traded on the stock exchange or maybe any other financial market. We can trade them if we don't want to wait for the maturity period. Next one is treasury bonds. Remember, there is difference between the treasury bonds and treasury notes. Okay, let's talk about the treasury bonds, then we will discuss the difference. Treasury bonds are basically debt security with a maturity of more than 10 years. Up to 10 years, it's the treasury notes. More than 10 years, it becomes the treasury bonds. And there is interest payment just like the treasury notes. They are issued in 30-year maturity and payment interest twice a year. So 10 years, 25 years, 30 years period. They are issued by the central bank on behalf of government. They are issued to meet long-term deficits. They can be traded on the secondary capital market. The only difference was that they are for more than 10 years. 10 years or more than that. But T-notes, they are from 1, more than 1, less than 10. Right? The rest of the things are same. Both of them are debt security and debt financing or debt investment. Okay, now we have bonds. They are also called commercial bonds. They are issued by the listed organizations or well-reputed business organizations or companies. Okay, the purpose is to raising capital by borrowing money from the people, and they have interest rates whose payments are made periodically, and they are issued by the companies to meet the long-term deficits. They can be traded just like other securities on the secondary capital market. They have an interest rate. They have a repay principal, how the principal amount can be repaid, and they are a good source of tax shield. Means they save you from paying more tax. It's because if you issue stock, you'll have to pay dividend, and dividend is subject to tax. But interest is not subject to tax. Interest is an expense, and expense reduces your income tax, while dividend increases your tax burden. So that's why most of the companies issue bonds as a tax shield to save them from the tax, and as well as to fulfill their financial obligations and financial deficits. Bondholders have no ownership in the company. It's not the evidence of investment, or we can say it's not the evidence of ownership in the company. It's just the evidence that you have lended amount of money to a company, and company has borrowed that from you. Remember, this is the specimen of the commercial paper, the bond. Remember that all the financial securities can be traded on the financial market, and while you are buying and selling, you can have a capital gain or capital loss that we discussed in our first class, so you have to understand that. Next we have common stock. Common stock is a type of share. Basically, it shows your ownership in a company. It's a evidence of ownership in a company. The companies issue it when they want to do equity financing and they want to gather large amounts of money, raise bigger funds in order to invest in long-term projects. The person who purchases the stock, common stock, is called shareholder, and he receives dividend at the end of every accounting period, and he can buy and sell these stocks on the stock market to get the capital gain as well. There is no interest on the common stock. They are dividend, and dividend is not fixed. The percentage of dividend is fixed, but the amount of dividend is not fixed. It fluctuates. Sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. It depends upon the profit of the company. The more profit the company earns, the more is the dividend. The less profit the company earns, the less is the dividend. So it's a equity financing or equity based financial security. Okay. The person who has the common stock, they can have a voting power to choose who can run the company, but the bondholder does not have a voting power. Okay. The common stockholder have a preemptive right. What does preemptive right mean? It means that if the company wants to issue new shares, they'll be issued to others only if you are not willing to purchase. The first priority is the existing stockholder, so that's called the preemptive right. So the best example of the common stock market is the stock exchange. Okay. Next, this is the specimen of the common stock. Now we have preferred stock. Preferred stock is same as common stock. It's the same thing, but the only difference is that it has a fixed amount of dividend. The amount of dividend is fixed here. It's not fluctuating, right? And they have no voting power. Preferred stockholders have no voting power, and we can call it as a hybrid security as well, because it has the characteristics of the bond as well as the characteristics of the stock. The characteristics of the bond is that it has a fixed income, just like the bond. And the characteristic of the stock is that it shows the investment or the ownership in a company. Bond does not show the ownership, but they do show the ownership, right? So that's the only difference between the preferred stock and common stock. The differences were that it has a fixed dividend. Number two, they have no voting power and they have no preemptive rights, right? These three are differences between the common stock and preferred stock. The fourth difference is that they are given preference over the common stockholder at the time of liquidation, just like bonds. After the bondholders, preferred stockholders are paid for their investment that they have made in the company in case of liquidation. So the rest, they are just like the other stocks. So that was the end of the chapter number 4. I hope you guys learned about the financial securities and financial instruments, short term, long term, money market, capital market, debt based, equity based, debt financing, equity financing. So there are different terminologies that we can use interchangeably. The common thing in financial security is that they have they're issued. It's a legal document which represents the legal agreement between the entities, issued by the organizations, has a maturity period, has a monetary value, and can be traded on the financial market. These are 5 common characteristics of all the financial securities, and then we can divide them into money market and capital market, debt based, equity based, debt financing, equity financing. So that's what our discussion was today, and I hope you learned. And if you have any questions, please get back to me. I'm more than happy to assist with you and to clear the doubts that you have about the financial securities. Thank you so much, and bye.